Hello everyone, it's Tommy, aka Knowledge, and welcome to part 8 of my beginner's guide to Smite 2. Today we are going to be covering the overview for the mid lane, okay? So just like in dealing with the soul lane, we're going to start with an overview episode of the mid lane. We're going to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the mid lane role and the gods that are usually played there, and then we'll also talk a little bit about the items and how to play the mid lane from a map down perspective. And then in the next, what I'm calling a point 2 of an episode, I'll go through some gameplay so you can see how the overview that we discussed today translates into some actual gameplay in the mid lane. Okay. So the first thing I like to do in these videos is that the game, when you click on the role to set your role priority in the conquest queue, gives you a little bit of a description of what the role does. And so I figure this is a good place to start because it gives us a very, very brief and general overview of what the mid lane is. And that way I can describe a little bit about what the mid lane does and make sure that I agree with what the game is telling you. So, mid laners are damage dealers who focus on gaining gold by slaying enemy minions and monsters. Their strength lies in their ability to quickly secure objectives or deal large amounts of damage. This is absolutely true. Mid laners are one of, if not the highest damage class / role in the game. And they do indeed focus on clearing minions and jungle camps in the early game, and they do have with their damage, the ability to secure objectives and deal large amounts of damage. That's absolutely true. Mid laners typically start the match in the mid lane and often prioritize defeating objectives near the center of the map. That's just saying, like, yep, you're mid, which means you play in the middle lane for the most part, at least to start the game, and then you are prioritizing farm in the early game as well. Okay, so that's definitely true. But of course, just like with the solo lane, there is much more to the mid lane role than what they just told you right there. Knowing that is going to get you through maybe the Lanning Phase and not much else. So let's first, though, dive into the characteristics of the main lane role and start diving a little bit more into more details here about what goes on in mid. Okay. So like they mentioned, we have burst damage and we have sustained damage. Okay. So burst damage is the characteristic of your god to determine how much damage can they do in one ability or in one set of abilities. So like one ability, if you just throw your 2, how much damage is that going to do? Or just throw your ult. Or, you know, if you throw out your ult, your 1, your 2, your 3, and maybe a couple of autos in between, how much damage is that going to do? Okay. Sustained damage is if you are hitting somebody for 10 seconds with a combination of abilities and auto attacks, how much damage is that going to do? Okay. So as you can see here with burst damage, mages have the highest burst damage in the game. Okay. Mid laners have, in a single ability, some of the largest damage numbers in the entire game. Okay, I'm talking Vulcan ults, Janus ults, Scylla circles, Janus 2s, Vulcan 1, Vulcan 3. Okay, these are some abilities that if you get hit by them, they can one-shot you potentially in the late game or deal more than half of your health bar. Okay, to squishies for sure. Tanks usually maybe a quarter to half damage of your health bar, but still, you can get absolutely annihilated by some of these abilities by characters in the mid lane, especially in the late game. Okay, so that is something to watch out for, is that you can take a ton of damage out of nowhere and not be expecting it. Okay, so if you get like CC'd and you get stunned or you get heavily slowed or you get knocked up or something, there could be a large amount of damage coming to you that could be very bad for you. They do also do a good amount of sustained damage because you tend to be building cooldowns, so your abilities aren't on too long of a cooldown. That being said, though, they're not as high of sustained damage as a carry because their auto attacks don't tend to do a ton of damage. They do tend to be heavily ability reliant. So their abilities do a lot of burst damage, but since they do still have cooldowns, they're not going to be doing quite as high of sustained damage as carries typically. Okay, I mean that's a typical way that goes. But overall, though, high damage class. Okay. So what's the trade-off for that? Well, that means you have a trade-off in terms of defense and in terms of crowd control. Okay, so defense just describes how much health and how much defense and protections are you typically having on this god, and the answer is not much. Okay, you are not building defense in this role, and so inherently you are going to have very low protections. Okay, in terms of crowd control, you don't really have a ton of crowd control either for the most part. If you do, it's usually on like one ability for the most part. And that form of crowd control can vary depending on what god you're playing. It can be a stun, it can be a slow, sometimes it's maybe a knock-up or like a portal if you're lucky, but it depends on what god you're playing. And so you have more crowd control than the typical carry, okay, who's just usually dealing with like a stun or a slow for the most part. So there's more unique forms of crowd control that you can have potentially on a mid lane character, but your duration doesn't tend to be very high, and if you have it, it's usually only on one ability, okay? That being said, because you do have a little bit more crowd control than a carry, you also therefore have a little bit more defense because you have the ability to self-peel a little bit more and try to, run away after stunning somebody or slowing them. So you have the ability to get away a little bit better than a carry typically does. And because you have high burst damage, you can quickly like turn around, throw out an ability, and turn back around and keep running. And that quick burst damage might convince the person that's chasing you to run away. Okay, that might not always work if the other player knows what they're doing, but it could potentially scare them away. So that's why I rate your defensive capabilities higher than a carry would be. Okay. In terms of utility, I actually rated mids in the middle here. To me, it's higher than a carry for sure, but also higher than a jungler because there are some unique forms of crowd control that aren't present on junglers, and there are some gods that do actually heal in the mid lane or can gain extra protections or can like gain extra damage. So I thought that they have a little more utility. They have a little bit more sometimes what their kits can do than a jungler can. I will say it's close, but I thought that they maybe have the edge just because of the variety of some of the things that you can see from mid lane characters. And so going off of that variety of characters is also why the build variety is a little bit higher than carries. Not much, because you are still a damage class, and the damage, like the highest damage build that you can go is usually fixed for the patch. And so once it's figured out what that highest damage build is, you're going to be sticking to that for the most part. That being said, there are some more situational and unique gods in the mid lane that do require a separate build sometimes. So the build variety is a little bit higher than carry, but overall it's pretty low because once you figure out what the best damage build is for your character, you're sticking to that build for the patch or until an item in your build changes or another item gets buffed. Okay, and that can only happen like once every 2 weeks. So there's not a whole lot of build variety there. Now, the most objective part about this is how I rate this in terms of a new player, and I'm going to say it's right behind the solo lane, okay? The mid lane is, to me, definitely by far the easiest damage-based class to play because in the early game, it's pretty simple as to what to do. You're trying to get farm as efficiently as possible, and then since you are in the mid lane, you tend to be alone for a good bit of the match. So you don't have to worry about too much chaos. That being said, there is a little bit more chaos going on than in the solo lane. You're not quite left alone as much. But with the build variety being low and you having some unique attributes to your god and the ability to do high amounts of damage, I do think that this is definitely the way to get introduced to playing a damage character in Smite, without a doubt. Okay? And the reason why I say it's a little bit easier than support, especially when it comes to Smite 2 versus Smite 1, is because it's easier to hit abilities in this game. It's not as hard to do it. It's just not as mechanically involved of a game. And I also think that there are some easier mid laners to play in this game compared to Smite 2. The first example that comes to mind is like Neith, for example, right? Like Neith, you didn't really see a whole lot of her in mid in Smite 1, but she is a meta and a new player-friendly god in Smite 2, and that definitely contributes to it being a much more new player-friendly role in this game than compared to Smite 1. Okay, so that is the overview of what mid laners are good at and what they're not so good at. So then the next piece we're going to go into is to discuss the mid lane items, okay? So we are going to start up here in the top 2 tiers, okay? When we get into the gods, you're going to see that most of the gods in the mid lane are intelligence-based scaling or can at least go intelligence-based scaling as one of their options, okay? And so as a result of that, they're the intelligence items tend to be more common, and so I decided to split them into a couple of different tiers. Okay, so first of all, if you're playing an intelligence-based god in the mid lane, these are the 2 starters you're looking at. You're either looking at Sands of Time or Archmage's Gem. Sands of Time does tend to be more popular, at least as of writing this video, because it has cooldown on it. That being said, Archmage's is the more burst damagey option. It does depend on what god you're playing as well, so that's definitely something to take a look at. But those are by far the most common starters, and really, for the most part, the only starters you should be considering if you're going an intelligence build in the mid lane. Okay, now all of these items right here are a combination of very good cooldown items that provide intelligence, or just items that are going to give you a bunch of intelligence, or penetration. Okay, so like you have Ob Shard for penetration that you need to be building almost always in the third or fourth item slot. You should not be building it later than that. I see this as a ridiculous mistake that even experienced players at this point make, and it makes me very annoyed. So never do that, please. Either go Ob Shard third or fourth item. Most of the time you're going at fourth item, but never later than that. Okay. And so then you have like Rot to Hootie, which gives you a 20% increase to the intelligence that you have from all of your items. So that's also a core item. You're usually going that fifth fifth item. Okay. And then your other items are a combination of like Dumor, which is like a high intelligence item, but you have like Chronos Pendant and Gem of Focus and Spear of Deso, which are cooldown based items. You have Book of Thoth, which is a stacking item that gives a bunch of intelligence. It gives you extra intelligence based on the amount of mana you have. So these items up here are common and will most of the time fill out your entire build in the mid lane. Okay. That being said, there are some situational items where in certain gods you may not just go these items up here, but instead some of these down here. Like if you're playing Anubis or a lifesteal based god, Bancross is a must for you. There are certain gods that maybe have a little bit more that are intelligence based that rely on auto attack damage, like Poseidon. So Nimble Ring is really good on those gods. Totem of Death is another pen option. So if you're looking to go another pen item late in your build, Totem of Death is possibly an option. Like this is another lifesteal option. Worldstone reduces the cooldown of your ultimate by 30%. So if you're really dependent on your ultimate, that can be something to possibly consider. But these aren't as nearly as common, and they're really situational to the god that you're playing. Okay. Now right here I have the most common strength items. So for the most part, you are an ability-focused god or are going an ability-focused build if you are playing in the mid lane. And so Bluestone tends to be the most common strength starter. That being said, you could go Death's Toll maybe. Definitely not as common. I would definitely focus on Bluestone if you're a strength-based god and playing in the mid lane. And so because you tend to be ability-based, you tend to be going the ability-focused items. So things like Heartseeker, you have your penetration item, you have Crusher. So you have items that give you high strength, but you also have some strength items that give you cooldown. So these are the most common items that you should consider building if you are going a strength-based ability player character in the game. Okay. And this next tier, I have the rare items, because these are items that you could theoretically build, but either they're too expensive, too niche, or really don't fit strategies that work well in the mid lane. Like you should not really ever be going crit out of the mid lane. Okay, that's usually never a strategy that works out for you. And a lot of the auto attack items don't work out. There's just some like flat out bad items down here that you really like shouldn't be building in the mid lane. That being said, right, like you have Cowl down here and you have the crit starter, right? Cowl, again, for the most part, you're left alone in the lane, so going that isn't very good. Vamp Shroud, maybe you could go like on an intelligence character, but yeah, it doesn't really, it's more for lifesteal, so maybe it could go in situational, but I don't see it enough to be worth it. You're usually not even going Vamp Shroud on Anubis in the mid lane, so it's pretty rare. The one thing that I will mention is that I've got a special mention here for Magi's Cloak, okay? If you are going to go a defense item in the mid lane, which 99.9999, like I can't state this, like you almost never do this, but if you do, for whatever reason, your team decides, hey, it might be a good idea to get a defense item, you're going at last item, you're going at sixth item, you might pick up a Magi's Cloak, okay? I have seen that very rarely, but that's usually if you're feeding and dramatically far behind and you just need to live, or you're getting dove a lot by the enemy team's jungler, right? Since Mad Eye's Cloak can absorb a hard CC once every 120 seconds. That can be helpful, but that's super rare. So that's why it's in the rare category, okay? But besides that, all of the other defense items are in this never build category, okay? So you can see, unlike the Soul Lane, there is a lot more never build items. You are not building defense in this role. Even if you're behind, you're not doing that because you won't do enough damage, and your damage is one of the best ways to get people off of you, okay? They can't kill you if they're already dead, okay? So, in this tier we have, the support starters, we have the jungle starters, Warriors Axis 2 defense focus to go, and then you have a bunch of defense items down here. You even have most of the hybrid items don't even offer you enough damage capability to even consider going. So these are items that you should never be building out of the mid lane. Okay, so that being said, it is now time to go into an overview of how to play the mid lane from the top-down perspective. Okay, so just like with the Soul Lane video, some people find this overview of just going through things on the map as helpful because it's hard to sometimes understand and see things when you're in game and there's a lot of things happening. Okay, so if you start in mid, you are going to head up to your tower and you're just going to stay here until the minion waves get close to each other. What you want to try to do is you want to try to, as the minion waves start to get close, walk up and start autoing the minion wave when it's in the enemy tower. Okay, you want to try to group up the wave because a lot of mage clearing abilities, you want the minion wave bunched up a little bit, just makes it easier to hit. Okay. Now, in doing so, the other mid laner could try to poke you and hit you with some auto attacks or maybe even waste an ability on you. As long as you're not taking too much damage, that's fine because it's going to lower their clear time, okay? And you're going to out-clear them to start, which is going to be to your advantage, okay? Sometimes you can get into a boxing match before the minion wave meets, and usually you're trying to avoid that unless you know that you have better skill than the other player, which as a new player you probably don't. So let's just be honest about that. Keep in mind that there is a bush right here, so sometimes the enemy mid laner could be hiding in that bush and catch you off guard. So do be wary of that. Check the bush occasionally. But anyway, so right away, you're going to hug your tower, and then as the minion waves get close to me, you're going to auto this, and then you're going to clear this wave using your highest damage ability and a combination of auto attacks. Okay? Then things start to get a little bit more complicated, and it depends on what your jungler does. Okay? Right now, the most common start for junglers is that the jungler is going to start at their yellow, they're going to clear their XP camp, and then they're going to run over here to the Cyclops camp and the red camp. Okay? So after you clear your first wave, assuming that your jungler is doing their job properly, you should meet up with them and clear the Cyclops camp and clear this red camp with them, and you're going to pick up this red buff, okay? Because that's going to help you clear, okay? Some junglers are going to say, hey, I want the red buff. As a new player, I kind of am forced to say that you should just give it to them, but it depends on your god and how much you're going to struggle to clear the minion wave and a lot of other factors as to whether you should pick it up over your jungler. But that's maybe a conversation for the jungle video, okay? But you should help your jungler clear both of these camps. That way you get some extra XP right off the bat, and so that way you can level up faster, okay? Now sometimes the jungler might do something different. They might start at red and clear the buff on their own and just drop it for you. Sometimes the jungler will start like this back camp and then go to this camp and then go to this camp. Sometimes your jungler might be invading the enemy team's camp. So it's just important at the beginning of your game that you communicate with your jungler, okay? But as a new player, it's most common that they're going to clear this, and then walk over, okay? That's the simple go-to start, okay? But the key part here for you as a mid laner is that you should usually be linking up with your jungler to help clear a couple of camps with them so you can get some more early game XP, and that'll help you a lot in the early game, okay? So then what you are looking to do early on in the game is clear minion waves as they show up, okay? And then camps that you are looking to farm are these two camps here, this back camp and maybe this back camp. This is kind of a maybe. It's kind of far away to get over here, so that's definitely not a priority. And this red camp, and you can also invade. Invading is also an option back here, okay? So ideally what happens is that you clear, once you get to like level 3, maybe 4, you clear a minion wave, and then you go look for one of these camps, okay? And you see if they're up, okay? Why this is important is that you are trying to get ahead, you are a damage dealer, you are important to the team, and so you are farming these camps. Sometimes your jungler will take these camps, sometimes you'll split these camps with your jungler. It depends on what your jungler's up to and what they're doing, and if they're, with you or not. But you shouldn't be waiting around for your jungler to do something. If they want to be there, they should prioritize being there. Okay. And so those are the camps you're looking for. So in the early game, in the laning phase, it's minions and these camps and possibly an invade. Usually you want to be with your jungler. Okay. Things that you need to be watching out for in the early game. Okay. You are in the mid lane. Okay. So you are kind of vulnerable here because you can be attacked from from the left and from the right. Okay. So the enemy team's jungler has a lot of paths to get to your lane. Okay. And possibly kill you if you are out of position. Okay. And keep in mind, you only have one Cyclops ward. Of course, clearing these Cyclops camps helps you, but ideally, your jungler should also be helping you ward these entrances to your lane, ideally. But maybe they're bad and they're not. Okay, but you might only have one ward here. So something to maybe consider is occasionally picking up an extra ward, just give yourself a little bit of extra protection. But your positioning here in the early game does matter, right? You don't want to just be constantly walking up to the front of their tower line, okay? Even if the enemy god is low, because their jungler could come in and kill you pretty easily, okay? You're in a central location. You're much easier to get to than somebody that's out in the solo lane or is out over here, okay? So you got to be very careful of that. And I've seen so many people in mid lane die like 3 times before the 5-minute mark because they're constantly out of position, and the jungler can just jump on them and kill them. Okay, so keep in mind that you have your active item and you have your damage to try to keep yourself alive and not in a bad spot. Of course, your jungler should also be, helping out in this situation, but you can't always count on it sometimes. And their jungler cannot constantly be in your lane either. And so that's something to watch out for. Okay, so that's the laning phase. You gotta farm, but you have to be safe. Okay, if you see an opportunity for a kill on the enemy team's mid or jungler, you can take it, but you got to be safe about it. Okay, I see so many mids just try to run at the enemy mid and try to repeatedly run them down, and it doesn't end well for them. Okay, so now as you get into the mid game, okay, so this is 10-12 minute mark, right? What usually happens is that the support at some point is going to rotate and come to mid. Okay, they're going to leave their carry player and they're going to come to mid, okay? So, in the middle game, you are still prioritizing farm, okay? Now, if your team calls an objective, like the Ritual, the Naga, the Gold Fury, right, you should go to that because you're a high damage player and you're in a central location, so it should be easy for you to get there, okay? Should be sticking with your team. You are prioritizing farm, though. So, something that I see happen very frequently is that the support and or jungler will just constantly be staying in your lane. They'll be splitting your waves with you, or they'll constantly be trying to start fights with the enemy team. Okay. Depending on the situation, this can be bad for you. Well, okay. Well, first of all, it's always bad if your support and jungler are constantly sitting in your lane, splitting your waves with you, because that means you're missing out on golden XP. Okay. So do not be afraid to say, hey, support, you've been in my lane for 2 or 3 waves. Please go to solo lane or go somewhere else. Okay, let me get a couple of waves of my own. You can say that to your jungler as well. Like, go farm your own camps or go to a different lane, please. Okay. In terms of fighting over and over again, right? If you're fighting over and over again, you're not focusing on your camps, right? And if you're fighting over and over again and you keep dying, well, now you're losing even more farm and you're falling behind. Okay. If you're fighting and winning, I mean, that's one thing. And hopefully because you're winning those fights, you're able to go to objectives and go get camps and go invade. And if you're not doing that, then you're doing something wrong. Okay. So again, saying to your support or jungler, like, hey, like, we don't need to keep fighting. I just want to focus on getting some farm here is a valid thing to say. Okay. But something you can be looking to do as a mid laner to alleviate this problem is to rotate. Okay. So you can, since you're in a central location, you can go to either carry or solo side of the map, okay, and try to gank their lane. Okay, you can team up with your jungler when this happens. You can team up with your support when this happens to try and go get a kill. to help you, push the advantage in a particular lane or go get some farm. Okay, this is especially helpful if you are constantly getting ganked by the enemy jungler in the mid lane, or you're just not feeling safe. Okay, if you're constantly sitting in the mid lane, right, the jungler on the enemy team and the support on the enemy team know where you are. They know where you're at. They know where you're positioned, and they know what you're doing. Okay, so they can frequently pop in to try to kill you. Okay, but if you're rotating to a different lane and you're not in the lane and you're not on one of their wards, they don't know exactly where you are, right? Like, you could be farming a camp back here. You could be, you could be over here, right? You could be farming these camps, right? They don't necessarily know where you are, right? Now, they can anticipate what side you're going to based on where you run, right? But sometimes it's even beneficial, even if you have no camps up and the minion wave hasn't showed up yet, just to walk into the jungle. Okay, make sure and preferably you walk to where one of your wards is. Okay, so that way you know that you're at least in a somewhat safe area. But just by walking into the jungle, you can maybe get their mid to call it and say, hey, he's missing. I think he's going right, so you need to retreat and right. Even though you don't actually have the intention of going over there and trying to kill them, that can get the enemy team to back off, and maybe good things come from that, right? Or it can just like help out one of your teammates. Okay, so you have a lot of ability to affect the game from the mid lane without even actually showing up and fully rotating to a lane. Okay, things to keep in mind if you do decide to go for a full rotation to a lane. If you get over here, right, you ideally want to be going for kills. Keep in mind that if the other mid doesn't rotate, that they can be pushing up this wave, and they can be getting farm, and they can be invading you. Okay, so there's a potential to lose farm, especially if you get stuck over there for too long, right? So you need to, clear your wave, hustle over there, and then hustle back, right? Now that might involve backing and teleporting up the lane, but it should be just like with solo lane rotations, right? You want to get over there, you want to do something, and then you want to move on and get back to your lane. Okay. The other thing that I will say is, because you are a little bit higher damage, it does tend to be easier to push the enemy tower. Okay, in the early game, in the laning phase, I wouldn't recommend doing this. In the mid game, maybe. But because you are in the mid lane, your towers and structures are extra valuable. Okay, because it's the easiest lane to just run it straight down the middle lane and go end the game. Okay, so your structures in your lane are much more valuable. So keeping your towers alive for longer in this lane does tend to be a priority. Okay. I'm not so concerned if we're losing towers in left or right per se, but if I'm losing towers in mid, it's just so much less time to go run it down mid and end the game than it is in a side lane. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind when you're playing mid, is that your tower tends to be more valuable. Okay, so like I said, you do the laning phase in the mid part of the game, right? There's going to be the ritual that spawns in your lane, so you're going to be helping out with that. And you can be looking for rotations. Good mid laners know when to rotate and how to maximize those rotations to help their teammates get ahead, and to help yourself get ahead, and to snowball the game and win the game. Okay. Bad mid laners just sit in the mid lane all game. They constantly fight the enemy team, and they drop farm, and they fall behind, and then don't do enough damage in the late game, and their team ends up losing the game. Okay. So the mid part of the game is definitely a pretty crucial time where you can tell the difference between somebody who's good in mid and somebody who's bad in mid. Okay. So now what about the late game? Okay. In the late game, you are sticking with your team. You are a member of the back line. Okay. So ideally, you do not want to be engaging in fight. You do not want to be the initiator in fights. Your job is to, if your front line engages onto somebody, is to follow up on whatever CC is deployed and try to kill them. If that so happens. Okay, the other thing that might happen is you might get dove by their jungler and or solo laner. This is where you need to use your Aegis or beads correctly, and know how to juke abilities and dodge damage, but also get out your damage and actually hit your abilities and damage, so that whoever is diving you will either die or they'll run away because they've taken too much damage and they haven't done enough damage to you. Okay. You're a squishier character. So you have to recognize that, and recognize that you also do a lot of damage. So you got to play to your strength of doing damage. Okay, you got to play to that strength. Since you are high in burst damage, you are very good on objectives. Okay, one of the most common roles that you fulfill, you're usually the damager on the objective, right? So you have the tank, the zoner, and the damager. You're usually one of the damagers. but you have the ability to do what is called secure an objective. Since you usually have a high damage ability or two, like, you know, Janus 2 and maybe your ultimate, right? You have the ability to do a lot of damage, okay? And so since objectives are whoever gets the buff from them and the golden XP is from whoever last hits them, since you do a lot of damage, you're able to one-shot the objective at a much higher health threshold than somebody who doesn't have a high damage ability, okay? So usually when the objective is getting to like 1,000, 2,000 to 1,000 health, you're getting to one-shot range on your ultimate ability most of the time on most mages, okay? So what you can do is you can ult, right, when you get to that health threshold, hit the objective and do a big chunk of damage that will prevent the enemy team who's maybe contesting the objective from getting it from you, okay? This is also goes the other way, not only to secure, but you can try to steal using this, right? Some of these ultimates, like Janus ult, for example, have a lot of range. So you can throw this out from a long ways away, and it'll do a ton of damage, and you can maybe steal the objective out of nowhere, okay? So your objective play as a mid is very important, and you need to recognize your role as the person who can possibly secure if the enemy team is showing up or contesting, okay? You can make or break the game sometimes, especially on like a late game enhanced fire giant, if you can steal or secure the objective for your team, okay? And there have been games thrown because the mid doesn't use their ultimate on an objective at the right time, and their team loses that enhanced fire giant, they lose the game, okay? So you have a big role to play on these objectives, okay? That cannot go without saying, and that is one of your major duties in the late game. You don't do a ton of damage to structures because abilities don't work on phoenixes and towers, but you do have, you know, some penetration items, so you do some damage to towers. Okay, you're doing more than like your support and solo usually, for example. It's important in the late game to stay grouped with your team so you don't get jumped on by their jungler at a 1v1 fight that you're probably going to lose, right? You want to be with your team who can help protect you if something crazy or unexpected happens, okay? You know, I see so many mids just get caught out of position. That being said, right, in these team fights, right, you can't be playing scared either, right? Yes, you are squishy, but you can't be afraid to throw out your damage, okay? If you start playing scared and falling back from a team fight, then if you get jumped on, your support's going to be too far away and you're going to die anyway, okay? So I see a lot of people, especially when you're behind in mid, get scared and not be in the proper position, okay? You cannot play damage dealers in Smite and have fear, okay? You have to believe that you're going to throw out enough damage and that your team is going to be able to help you, okay? And sometimes that's going to be really hard, but that's what you have to do, okay? So that being said, let's close out of this overview, and let's go look at some of the gods that get played in the mid lane. So we're under mid here, and so these are the gods that are played. Most of them are ability based. If I were to give 2 or 3 gods that are good for new players, I would say Agni, Neith, and Scylla are probably the best ones. All of these gods have some sort of mobility, they have some sort of stun, and they have some high damage abilities that can be used to secure objectives and that can be used to burst down enemy team members. Yeah, I mean, most of these gods are in scaling gods. I mean, even Neith you're usually going int in the mid lane. I'm in int based build. Actually, now I'm looking at there's like no strength gods in here. Like, what happens if I search for what happens if I look up strength here? Because I think I want to mention some other. Yeah, so there's no. Okay, so we're gonna go click on this and this. Okay, so okay, that isn't even that good of a selection. So other gods that you can play in the mid lane that are potentially strength based. Medusa is one right now that's pretty popular. Okay, that has some good damaging based abilities. Who else do I see sometimes? Most carries do have the ability to be played in the middle lane. Like Artemis Aspect can be played in the middle lane as a physical damage god. I've seen Izanami in the mid lane. Danza can play in the mid lane. Ullr can play in the mid lane. Ullr's another really common one. Sol is an ADC / mid, so she can kind of fulfill both roles. So there's a lot of carries that if you select the carry tab can also fit into the mid lane. So that's something that I should mention, as that if you're looking for a physical damage god out of the mid lane, these can also be good choices. Their playstyle is slightly different. They don't tend to have quite as many bursty abilities, but you know, they can help fulfill that role. That way, if your team's going 4 magical players, you're not necessarily stuck in a bad spot. Okay, so the god that I want to talk about that I'm going to showcase in our video is going to be Neith. Okay, we've seen her in, you know, quite a few episodes. She's one of the most new player-friendly gods. I'm going to be playing her without aspect. So we've already talked about her, right? So the reason why you can go an int-based build on her here is because her damage scaling on a broken weave is scales off of intelligence. Her 1 scales off of intelligence. Her 2 scales off of intelligence. Her heal scales off of intelligence. And her ultimate also scales off of intelligence. Okay. Her 3 doesn't, but your 3 you're really primarily using either for an escape or for a quick burst of damage to finish somebody off. You're not using it as a primary damage ability. Okay. So, and like our 2, for example, right, scales higher off of intelligence than strength, for example. Okay. So we're gonna play Neith in the mid lane, and you're gonna get to see how she works. So that being said, thanks everybody for watching. If you're a new player, I hope you learned something new. If you have a question or you're confused about something I said, please feel free to leave a comment. If you want clarification, leave a comment too. If you're a more experienced player, feel free to share this with some of your new player friends. If you think I said something incorrect or you have some piece of advice, feel free to leave a comment below. So thanks everybody for watching, and I will see you in the next video where we'll go over some mid gameplay.